Long before Audi made four-wheel drive famous, before anti-lock brakes appeared on a single ordinary car, a tiny British workshop had already built both into a production grand tourer, one company, years ahead of the entire world. They were called Jensen, and almost nobody remembers them. Because a few years after building one of the most advanced cars on Earth, Jensen was bankrupt, finished. The doors chained shut. They weren't beaten by Ferrari or Porsche or the giants of Detroit. They destroyed themselves, with one decision that seemed, at the time, like the only smart move left. Their great skill was building rare, expensive, handmade cars for the few who could afford them, and they threw it away, chasing high volume, cheap sales, and the vast American market, building a small car for the masses when everything they knew was how to build the opposite. This is how the most fearless small car maker in Britain talked itself into extinction. To understand the size of the mistake, you first have to understand how good Jensen actually was, and they were very, very good. The story starts in West Bromwich, in the industrial heart of the English Midlands, in the 1930s. Two brothers, Alan and Richard Jensen, took over a small body-making firm and put their own name on it. And from the beginning, they built a specific kind of car, one that shouldn't really have worked, but did. They took the elegance and hand-finished craftsmanship of a British luxury car and dropped in the huge, thundering V8 engines of America. British tailoring, American muscle. It was an unusual recipe, and Jensen made it their own. But here's the part most people don't know. For much of its life, Jensen wasn't just building its own cars, it was quietly building everyone else's. When a bigger manufacturer needed beautiful bodywork built to a standard their own factories couldn't manage, they came to West Bromwich. Jensen built the bodies for the big Austin-Healeys. They assembled and finished the Volvo P1800, the sleek coupe from the Saint. They had a hand in the Sunbeam Tiger. At times, this contract work filled most of the factory. Think about what that means. Jensen were the craftsmen other car companies trusted to do the difficult, beautiful work. They were the specialist's specialist. A small firm, punching so far above its weight that giants queued up for its skill. And then they built the car that proved just how far ahead they really were. In the 1960s, Jensen built a grand tourer called the Interceptor, and it was stunning. A long, muscular, Italian-styled body wrapped around a monster Chrysler V8, hand-assembled in the Midlands. It looked like it cost a fortune, because it did. This was a car for people who wanted something rarer and more special than a Jaguar, and didn't mind paying for it. But the Interceptor had a stablemate that was, quietly, one of the most advanced cars in the entire world. It was called the FF. From the outside, it looked much like the standard car. Underneath, it was witchcraft, because the Jensen FF was the first production road car, the first car you could order that wasn't a racing machine, to combine two technologies nobody else had dared to put together. Four-wheel drive, sending power to all four corners, for grip that ordinary cars simply didn't have, and an early anti-lock braking system adapted from the technology that stopped aircraft on wet runways, so the wheels wouldn't lock and skid under hard braking. Sit with the timeline for a moment. This was the late 1960s. Audi wouldn't make four-wheel drive a household name for well over a decade. Anti-lock brakes wouldn't become normal on family cars until the 1980s. And here was a tiny British firm in a modest factory in West Bromwich, selling both, in a single car, years ahead of the entire global industry. That is who Jensen was. Fearless, inventive, utterly unafraid to try what the giants wouldn't. A company that small had no business being that advanced, and yet it was. So how does a company like that end up bankrupt within a decade? The answer begins not with a triumph, but with a phone call that took away half their business overnight. For all its brilliance, Jensen had always leaned on one thing to keep the lights on: that contract work. Building bodies and cars for other companies filled the factory floor and paid the wages. It was steady, reliable money. And in 1967, it vanished. Two of Jensen's biggest contracts ended in quick succession. The big Austin-Healey came to the end of its life. The Sunbeam Tiger was discontinued. And just like that, The work that had occupied huge stretches of the West Bromwich factory simply stopped. The benches fell quiet. The lines that had hummed with other people's cars sat empty. This is the crucial thing to understand, because it's what makes everything that follows a tragedy rather than a farce. Jensen wasn't being greedy. Jensen was frightened. A firm that had always had a safety net suddenly found itself with a half-empty factory, a payroll it still had to meet, and no obvious way to fill the gap. When you're staring at silent machines and workers with nothing to build, you don't think about protecting your identity. You think about survival. Into that fear walked a man with an answer, and his answer sounded, at first, like salvation. His name was Kjell Kuvale, and he was about to change what Jensen was, forever. Kjell Kuvale was not a British craftsman. He was an American businessman, a hugely successful car importer based in San Francisco, and the biggest seller of Austin-Healeys in the United States. When the Austin-Healey died, Kjell lost his best-selling product too. So he and Jensen shared the exact same wound and the exact same hunger. Both needed a new car, and both were looking at America, the biggest sports car market on Earth. Kuvale didn't just suggest a solution. He bought his way into control of Jensen, taking a majority shareholding, and brought a vision with him. It was a simple, seductive, utterly logical-sounding idea. Jensen, he decided, should stop being a tiny maker of expensive, exclusive grand tourers. It should become something else entirely, a maker of a smaller, cheaper, sporty car, built in big numbers and sold by the thousand to eager American buyers. The forecasts were dazzling, 10,000 cars a year. Remember, this was a company that built its Interceptors at a rate of about a dozen a week. Kuvale wasn't asking Jensen to grow. He was asking Jensen to become the opposite of itself. And you can see why it looked like the smart move. The factory was empty and needed filling. Kuvale had the American dealer network to sell the cars. The Austin-Healey had left a gap in the market. On paper, in that frightened boardroom, it must have looked less like a gamble and more like a rescue. But it was a gamble, the biggest one they could possibly make. Because everything Jensen knew, everything they were brilliant at, was building small numbers of special cars by hand. They knew nothing about mass production, nothing about building to a price. And the first thing that Gamble needed was an engine Jensen didn't have and couldn't build. Here was the problem that should have stopped the whole project. Jensen had never made its own engines. The big cars used bought-in American V8s. But no American V8 belonged in a small, cheap sports car meant to sip fuel and sell in bulk. Jensen needed a modern, compact four-cylinder engine, and they had to find someone to supply it. So they went shopping, and one by one, the doors closed. They looked at a Vauxhall engine. It met the American emissions rules, but couldn't produce the power they wanted. They looked at a German Ford engine, but industrial troubles meant supply couldn't be guaranteed. They went to BMW, but BMW couldn't build them in the numbers Jensen needed. Every sensible, proven option fell through. The company had bet everything on a high-volume car, and couldn't find a reliable heart to put inside it. Then Colin Chapman, the brilliant, mercurial founder of Lotus, stepped forward with an offer. He had a brand new engine, a clever, modern 16-valve twin-cam design. On paper, it was exactly what Jensen needed. In reality, it was a trap, because that engine was barely finished. Jensen took it anyway. They had no choice left, and in doing so, they made themselves the paying testbed for Lotus's unproven engine, buying the mistakes and handing them straight to their customers. The results were miserable. The engine leaked oil, badly, and because of the way it sat, canted over at an angle in the car, the leaking oil ran down onto the hot exhaust, so a brand new Jensen would smoke and stink like a truck laying tar. The car that was meant to save the company arrived with an engine that embarrassed it, and the reputation for unreliability spread faster than the cars themselves could sell. But the engine was only half of the disaster. The other half was the car's own body, and this is where the story turns genuinely cruel. Remember what Jensen was famous for: bodywork, the craftsmanship other companies trusted them to do. Volvo, Austin-Healey. They came to Jensen precisely because Jensen built beautiful, well-made bodies. The little sports car, rusted like almost nothing else on the road. The rust was so bad, so fast, and so structural that owners found rot in cars that had spent their entire lives in the dry heat of the American desert, places where cars simply don't rust. The bodywork meant to be Jensen's signature strength became its most notorious weakness. The roofs leaked so badly they had to be redesigned. The company that built its name on doing bodywork better than anyone was now building some of the worst bodies on the market because it had abandoned its careful, hand-built pace and thrown itself into mass production it never understood. And then came the moment that told everyone how bad things really were. Austin-Healey, the racing legend whose name was actually on the car, whose reputation was stamped on every bonnet, walked away. He'd lent his name to the project, and as the reliability disasters mounted, he could no longer stomach the association. He left. When the man whose name is on the badge quits in dismay, no press release can hide what that means. The car meant to save Jensen was instead destroying the very reputations attached to it. And all of this, the rushed engine, the rusting bodies, the departing legend, was landing at the worst possible moment in modern history for a company that sold cars. Because while Jensen had poured its money, its focus, and its future into this small car gamble, the thing that had actually been keeping it alive was the big car, the expensive, thirsty, magnificent Interceptor, with its enormous American V8, was still where Jensen's real profit came from. And in October 1973, the oil crisis arrived like a hammer. Fuel prices exploded. Overnight, the world turned against exactly the kind of car the Interceptor was. Big, powerful, and enormously thirsty. Sales of the Interceptor, Jensen's cash cow, collapsed as buyers fled anything with a giant engine. The profitable car that had quietly funded everything was suddenly a liability. Now look at the trap Jensen had walked into, and feel how tight it was. On one side, the small car gamble was hemorrhaging money and destroying the brand's good name. On the other, the oil crisis had just killed the big car meant to keep the company afloat while the gamble paid off. Both ends collapsing at once, and because they'd sunk everything into the volume dream, there was no cushion left, no reserve, no safety net. The very safety net Jensen had lost in 1967 and never managed to rebuild. A bigger company might have survived one of these blows. Jensen was hit by both, at once, with empty pockets. And they had one last card to play. The last card was called the Jensen GT, a smarter, more luxurious version of the small car, dressed up with walnut and better trim, pitched as a kind of baby Interceptor. It was a genuine attempt to climb back toward what Jensen did best, something special, something crafted. But it arrived too late, cost too much to rush into production, and was priced absurdly high, dearer than cars that badly outsold it. And there's a detail here so bleak it's almost funny. When one of Britain's most respected motoring magazines reviewed the new Jensen GT, they opened by warning readers that the company was probably heading for bankruptcy. Imagine trying to sell a car when the review itself tells buyers the maker might not survive to honor the warranty. The end came quickly after that. In 1974, Q-Vale took full command and slashed production as sales dried up. By 1975, the situation was hopeless. Two-thirds of the workforce, around 700 people, faced redundancy, and the bank sent in a receiver to take control of the dying firm. And in May 1976, after 4 decades of building some of the most characterful cars Britain ever produced, Jensen Motors ceased trading. The benches at West Bromwich fell silent for the last time, the same silence that had frightened them into the gamble 9 years earlier, now permanent. Drive past West Bromwich today, and the factory is gone. The name flickered back to life a few times over the years, always briefly, always failing, until the original company was finally, formally dissolved decades later. And here is the irony that sits at the very heart of it all. Jensen was one of the most fearless small car makers Britain ever produced. They put four-wheel drive and anti-lock brakes on the road, years before the Germans made those ideas famous. They were the craftsmen the giants trusted with their most beautiful cars. Their whole identity, their whole genius, was in being small, being special, being unafraid to do what the big companies wouldn't. And the one mistake that killed them was deciding to stop being that. Frightened by an empty factory, seduced by an American promise of 10,000 sales a year, they walked away from the rare, hand-built, exclusive cars they were brilliant at, and chased a cheap, mass-market future they knew nothing about. The company that built the world's most advanced Grand Tourer was destroyed trying to build an ordinary sports car for everyone. Jensen didn't die because it couldn't build a great car. It proved, again and again, that it could. Jensen died the moment it lost its nerve and tried to become something it was never meant to be. The most fearless carmaker in Britain was undone, in the end, by a single loss of faith in itself.